Baroness Bennet of Manor Castle.
My Lords, the arrival of this bill in the House today, slow as it has been, is a huge victory for campaigners, something that mustn't be forgotten. That a right-wing government should be planning to acknowledge the many ways in which abuse can occur within the family, not just physical violence, is really radical progress. Recognition of the reality and seriousness of physical violence within the family little predates the start of this century, the early history of which the noble Lord Young of Cookham set out earlier. A hashtag sums up my point. Campaigning works. Victories inspire and encourage. Despite everything else that's been going on, as many other noble lords have noted, I've seen my inbox fill up quicker with briefings and proposals for improvements to this bill than any other, which is where I get to the inevitable but. This crucial bill should and can be much stronger to address the many issues of inequality, poverty, and powerlessness that COVID-19 has exposed and amplified. As the noble Lord Blunkett acknowledged with commendable frankness earlier in this debate, previous legislation has been inadequate. We need to get this right. My noble friend Baroness Jones of Molescombe has already addressed many issues, and I won't repeat those. Top of my list is no recourse to public funds, the immigration status that can effectively trap victims in abusive relationships. Only 5% of refuge places are available to women with no recourse to public funds status. The Step Up Migrant Women campaign makes many important points about how abusers can use immigration status and the threat of deportation against their victims. The law and the government's hostile environment must not be collaborators in domestic abuse. All services must be available without discrimination or danger. That's a fundamental principle of the Istanbul Convention. Another familiar theme is the discriminatory nature of universal credit. As our House expert Baroness Sherlock outlined, its household basis is profoundly dangerous, and of course its level inadequate. There should be a requirement at a minimum in the bill that separate payments are made by default and advances paid as grants to survivors of domestic abuse. All welfare changes and the current system should be assessed for their impact on abuse victims and the possibility of escape, and the obvious problems presented by the benefits cap ended. Employers too, as the TUC is stressing, need to have a statutory duty to support staff affected, including provision of a period of paid leave. But the only way to ensure that everybody has the resources they need to escape an abusive relationship is an unconditional payment to meet their needs, a universal basic income. However, services would still be needed. As Women's Aid notes, there's a 30% shortfall in the number of refuge spaces measured against need, and 64% of people referred had to be turned away in 2018-19. Funding for specialist dedicated services, both residential and in community, needs to be long-term and secure and guaranteed on the face of the bill. The market approach of making effective in-place services bid again and again for contracts is enormously wasteful and destructive. What's also lacking in the bill is a requirement that all publicly funded services make trained inquiries into current and historic domestic abuse and sexual violence as standard practice, as Baroness Armstrong of Hilltop highlighted earlier. Also, far more needs to be done in this bill to ensure family courts are fully aware of and acting on the risks and dangers domestic abusers present. A Ministry of Justice panel concluded that the presumption of contract should be urgently reviewed, and that's been started, but there's already ample evidence of the need to act. As a mother told that inquiry, it's not correct to assume before investigation that somebody will further a child's welfare just because they share his or her genes. And while we were talking about protecting children, I draw the House's attention to the so-called smacking bans in Scotland and Wales, and note that this bill could be an ideal opportunity to introduce that to England. Finally, I associate myself with the remarks of the noble Lady Baroness Kennedy of the Shores. Moments of change are rare and should be seized. Thank you, my lords.